Tonight on CBC Vancouver News.
When my rent goes up at least by 40%, there's no way we're going to survive.
Priced out, a small business owner in Kitsilano forced to shut down, calls for commercial rent protection. Also, wanted in BC, the man allegedly responsible for randomly attacking a mother and her toddler in Chinatown. And
it's never going to be enough unless we see the front line. On the front lines, people aren't dying anymore.
the federal government promises more funding to BC's overdose crisis, but activists say it's just not enough.
This is CBC Vancouver News.
Good evening, I'm Lien Yeung. Thanks for joining us. BC's new premier and leader for the BC NDP could likely be David Eby. The province's Attorney General and Housing Minister launched his campaign last night for party leader. And so far, he's the only candidate running. As Mira Baines reports, more on who he is and his plans for the next election.
If he winds up premier and leader of the BC NDP, David Eby makes it clear he will not be sending voters to the polls anytime soon.
I have no plans of a snap election, and we'll be working to deliver for British Columbians until the fixed election date.
That means Eby could face off against BC Liberal leader Kevin Falcon in October 2024. The opposition's attack ads have already started. It was just Tuesday when Eby launched his campaign, becoming the sole candidate for NDP leader.
There was a lot of concern about a long leadership run and what that would do for our team.
Premier John Horgan announced he would be stepping down from the province's top job once a new leader was chosen. Eby seems to be the party's clear choice, with support from 48 out of 57 NDP MLAs.
For us, one of the legacies of Premier Horgan is this united team, united caucus. We've worked well together.
Tonight, David talked extensively about housing and a place to live, about security of community. That's a message that resonates with everybody.
Eby has a history of tackling difficult and complicated issues. He was a lawyer with Pivot and then executive director of the BC Civil Liberties Association.
Knowing when it's appropriate to use force and when it's not appropriate to use force is a judgment call that comes after learning years of experience on the job.
Eby entered provincial politics and beat Liberal leader and then Premier Christy Clark in Vancouver, forcing her to take a seat in Kelowna. In an NDP government, Eby introduced reforms at ICBC and famously likened it to a dumpster fire.
They knew the dumpster was on fire, but they pushed it behind the building instead of trying to put the fire out.
Most recently, he's known for the Cullen inquiry into money laundering in BC. He was also minister responsible for housing, an issue he's passionate about.
There's some pretty straightforward math in terms of the number of people that are moving into our province and the number of housing units that we're opening, and it's really scary math.
The BC NDP leadership vote is scheduled for December, but NDP regulations state that a new leader could be acclaimed earlier, possibly in the fall, if there are no other candidates. Mira Baines, CBC News, Vancouver.
A little girl is in hospital with critical injuries after a car crash in Kitsilano earlier today. Vancouver police say the 5-year-old was standing on a sidewalk near Cornwall and Arbutus with her father and siblings at roughly 11 a.m. when 2 cars crashed in the intersection, sending one onto the sidewalk, hitting the girl. Both drivers remained at the scene. Police say no one else was hurt and are asking witnesses to come forward if they haven't already spoken with officers. Police in West Vancouver say they've arrested an alleged fraudster just before they scammed a senior out of a lot of money. The force says yesterday someone claiming to be, quote, Officer Baker from North Vancouver RCMP called the 80-year-old victim. They say they needed bail money to release the senior's grandson and convinced him to withdraw $16,000. When the fraudster showed up to collect, the victim got suspicious and flagged down some real cops nearby. They arrested a 26-year-old Richmond man and are recommending he be charged with fraud over $5,000. Police throughout Metro Vancouver have warned of a rise in scams targeting seniors. And testimony has wrapped up on the 3rd day of the sexual assault trial of Jake Virtanen. As Karen Larson reports, the defense has been interrogating the complainant, suggesting she could have done more to avoid having sex with the former Vancouver Canuck.
Defense counsel in the Jake Virtanen sexual assault jury trial spent a second day cross-examining the woman who claims the former Vancouver Canuck sexually assaulted her in his hotel room at the Westin Bayshore September 2017. The accuser's name is protected by a publication ban. At one point, lawyer Brock Martland suggested she could have avoided sex with Virtanen by, quote, inventing a story about menstruating or having a yeast infection. In a voice full of emotion, the woman replied she thought telling Virtanen no, that she didn't want to have sex was enough. Earlier, the woman testified she had explicitly said no and fended off his physical advances multiple times. She described him using his body weight to pin her on the bed before having non-consensual sex. Karen Larson, CBC News, Vancouver.
The toxic drug crisis is still taking the lives of thousands of people in BC and across Canada. Today, Ottawa announced it is putting another $40 million towards the fight. As Benit Brach reports, advocates welcome the funding, but they say more still needs to be done.
In BC, nearly 6 people are dying every day from drug overdose.
This can no longer be characterized as those people in the downtown east side. It's happening to people we know from all walks of life. It's an us problem.
It's partly why the federal government announced nearly $40 million will be split among 73 projects working on harm reduction and supporting those at risk from drugs.
They are saving lives. They're improving the quality of life and the dignity here in British Columbia and across the country.
The PHS Community Services Society in Vancouver is one of the projects getting funding. It sees about 2,000 people annually overdose at their facilities and is installing an app in its shelters which alerts emergency responders when a person is at risk of overdose.
People do want these tools and demonstrated success in being able to respond in a timely manner.
Minister Bennett says BC continues to have the highest number of overdose deaths among Canadian jurisdictions. And while the province will be decriminalizing some small amounts of illegal drugs next year, advocates say more funding and action are needed.
People are continuing to die and really need help.
For Sarah Blythe, more action means more safe supply.
We really need to make sure that people are having as much access as they can to doctors and also people who can give them something they know what they're taking and the amount of it.
She says more drug testing is also needed. While harm reduction projects are in the works, others say more urgency and bigger moves are needed to legalize and regulate drugs.
But these increments are so small and so slow that the crisis outpaces them every time. The sense of urgency, the sense of readiness, the sense of willingness to do, even spend a little political capital on us, it just isn't there.
Hoping that change comes faster to stop more people of all walks of life from losing their lives. Benit Brach, CBC News, Vancouver.
Vancouver police are looking for the suspect behind a random assault on a mother and toddler in Chinatown. A warning, this video may be upsetting to some viewers. The pair was on East Pender Street when the suspect slammed into them, knocking them both down. The assault happened after Shaquan David Kelly was running from police after he was allegedly kicking and denting cars. He was arrested and charged with mischief, assault, and obstructing a peace officer. However, he is now wanted BC-wide after failing to appear in court for a scheduled appearance. Witnesses should contact VPD. A family-owned diner in Kitsilano is closing after 30 years. The owner of Nellie's Grill says he is being forced out of business because the new landlord is increasing his rent by 40%. As Michelle Gassoub reports, other businesses on West 4th have also recently shut down with the same landlord.
Oh, Tom, how are you?
Good. For 30 years, Nellie's Grill on West 4th has been serving up breakfast and service with a smile. It's the kind of place where everyone knows your name. But the diner is closing its doors for good at the end of July.
Hopefully we'll be leaving without tears.
A new landlord and a new lease means rent is going up by 40%.
It will not survive on those bases.
Regulars and staff will tell you Nellie's is a Kitsilano fixture.
I come here almost every week and I've gotten to know the staff here. Some of them are good friends, you know. Yeah, it's a really sad day.
I've lived in the neighborhood for 20 years. I've been at Nellie's for over 15. I don't know, I've lost count. But it's sad to see all the mom and pop shops go.
Nellie's new landlord also owned the buildings on 4th that housed Bishop's Restaurant and Peak Golf. Bishop's closed earlier this year because of a rent increase, and Peak Golf relocated for the same reason. The company is called Navina Land, and their point person didn't return our requests for an interview.
I would say it was shocking, except for it's not.
City Councillor Colleen Hardwick says there's little the city can do to protect local businesses. Commercial tenancy protections would fall to the province, not the city.
So speculators are getting in on the action, and this will transform the neighborhood. And as we're already seeing, the mom and pop shops, the local treasures, will be priced out of the market.
For Nellie's, an abrupt end to 30 years of serving a community.
When people and companies bigger and richer than us, you feel you're backed up in a corner. It's sad, and I just hope everyone remembers all those good memories, of course, because, I cherish them.
A legacy of good food, good memories, and good people.
My customers are the best in the city. That's what I really feel.
Michelle Kasub, CBC News, Vancouver.
6 more communities will soon fall under BC's speculation and vacancy tax. The tax is expanding into North Cowichan, Duncan, Ladysmith, Lake Cowichan, Lions Bay, and Squamish. The changes will start in January of 2023, but residents won't have to declare their housing status until January of 2024.
People in these communities have been vocal. They've been vocal about the intense housing pressures that they are facing, including speculation and near zero vacancy rates. This is part of an incremental approach to build on the success of the speculation tax.
Today's expansion has received criticism for excluding Whistler and other resort-based communities whose residents also face rental pressures. Hot and dry conditions are fueling the growing wildfire near Lytton, a fire that once again has displaced people from the area. Nearby municipalities have been taking in evacuees.
There's a lot of frustration with them. This is the second fire within a year that they've had to face, and some of them that have lost their homes. There's a lot of shock and re-traumatization that's going on for them. It's a tough place to be in 1 year later.
Over 100 registered evacuees have been making their way to Lillooet since Thursday. Between fire, floods, and landslides, this is the 4th time in the last year Lillooet has been a hub for people fleeing natural disasters.
Hot and dry weather in our areas for the days ahead. Temperatures slightly above seasonal values and into the low 30s for parts of the southern interior within the TNRD, and potentially rising as early next week into potentially the mid to high 30s. So we're closely monitoring that weather situation.
Emergency officials at the Thompson-Nicola Regional District say 24 properties continue to remain under evacuation order, and that another 31 properties further north of Lytton are under evacuation alert. So, Joe, you heard that the fire crews there saying how tough it's been. Any relief in sight at all, even maybe in the long-range forecast?
Lien, we are looking at this high-pressure system to stick around for the long haul. So really, the just slightly above seasonal temperatures that we're getting right now across the interior, that's the best that we're going to see as temperatures heat up early next week. I want to show you the fire danger rating for today across the province. It is just amazing how quickly things have turned around. It seemed like it was just last week we were still watching for flood concerns from the melting snowpack. Very quickly, there is more high concern than not across the province as we continue to watch those temperatures build. At this point, though, I'm not seeing a big dry cold front to bring lightning strikes. That would be a big concern. So at least we don't have that in the forecast. But watch as I take you through these forecast highs. And we just heard it's sort of the low 30s that we'll be getting over the next couple of days. Watch as I take you through to Sunday. This is when we start to see those temperatures hit the mid to high 30s, a little concerning for the interior. And note Vancouver's temperature. We will be seeing temperatures hit the low 30s starting Sunday into early next week. And my models can see out pretty well about 10 days. And Leanne, through those 10 days, we are hot and dry. So definitely something to watch for and to start making plans for.
Absolutely. We all need that heat plan, right? Okay, thank you so much, Jo.
You're welcome.
Well, the race to become Surrey's next mayor now has 5 prominent candidates. As expected, Gordie Hogue threw his name into the ring earlier today. Our municipal affairs reporter, Justin McElroy, joins us for this. So, Justin, tell us more about Hogue and why he's running.
Yeah, you know, it's funny. For someone running for mayor of Surrey, Hogue is better known for the municipality just south of that, White Rock. He was mayor once, then he was a longtime MLA for the BC Liberals, then became an MP for the federal Liberals. But he lives in South Surrey and threw his name into the race today officially after months of rumors for the Surrey First Party that ran the city for about a decade in between Doug McCallum's first reign as mayor and his current one. Now, the big issue in Surrey has been policing, the transition to the independent police force, and Hogue says that if he and Surrey First are elected, there would be some sort of way for Surrey voters to give the ultimate say as to whether that finishes or not.
There isn't the background, the information necessary to make a well-informed decision, and I think that is the biggest issue and concern. And the commitment from the beginning of Surrey First was that the citizens of Surrey would have a say. They've not had that say yet.
So whether that's going to be a referendum or not, Hogue wouldn't say definitively, but certainly every candidate has a slightly different view of the Surrey policing transitioning. Hogue gives one more option for those voters who want some sort of say at the end of this.
Okay, Justin, so 5 front runners. We can see them behind you, a bit of a crowded field. Can you tell us more about who's running for mayor of Surrey and what are some of the main issues in this campaign?
Yeah, it's just one person for premier, but it's so many for Surrey mayor, right? We've got Suk Dhaliwal, the Liberal MP. We've got Brenda Locke, former MLA and current councillor. We have Ginny Sims, a current NDP MLA. We have incumbent Mayor Doug McCallum, and we have Gordie Hogue, who we've talked about. So those are the 5. We don't expect anyone more at this point to enter the race with any sort of profile. But you think about, sorry, what the big issues are going to be. Certainly they're going to talk about policing. They're going to talk about transportation. But if you look at just how big the city is overall, both in terms of population and geography, it's going to be hard for any one of them to campaign everywhere to get a foothold. And that brings in the question of vote splitting. McCallum is going to have his base that will support him over the last 4 years. So it leaves about 60-70% of the vote within those 4 anti-McCallum candidates. We asked Hogue today whether he was concerned about vote splitting or not. Here's what he had to say.
That's part of a democratic process, and it's vote splitting is that's what happens in democracies, and that's part of the strength of a democracy, and we should honor that. We shouldn't be complaining about it. We should say there are more people who are standing up and saying they want to make a difference.
So very passionate about that. He said people should be honored by it, but it could become a question as we get closer to October 15th if any of those 4 anti-McCallum candidates can become the dominant one or not, or whether they're all fighting for the same votes, leaving McCallum a chance to sift through the middle to get that second straight term.
All right, Justin McElroy, our municipal affairs reporter. Thanks, Justin. The 2030 Olympic bid is facing some hurdles as it moves forward. Why the city of Vancouver is hesitant to make a run for the podium this time. Next. And thanks for watching our commercial-free live stream. For the first time, Canada's National Archery Championships are being held on Prince Edward Island. About 300 archers from across the country are competing in multiple events this week. Have a look.
This week we're hosting the Canadian National Outdoor Championships, which is a combination of 3 events, the 3D, the Field, and the Target Championships. And we were supposed to host in 2020, and then a little thing called COVID happened. So here it is 2022, and we're finally getting our chance to showcase PEI. It's a lifetime sport. Like I started, I was quite young, I was 8 or 9 years old. And then I have athletes well into their 80s that are still shooting for fun and recreation.
We are shooting 3D outdoor national archery today. Everything had kind of shut down because of COVID, as the rest of the world did, so it's so nice to be back finally shooting. I started shooting in 2015, and I started doing competitive archery pretty quickly. I worked my way up and did my first Worlds in 2017 where we went to France, and then I did Worlds in 2019, so they're held every 2 years. One of the big things that I think archery has done for me is I've been able to travel a lot of places for the sport and then met so many people that I wouldn't have met if I wasn't in the sport as well. So it's more the community and like connection aspect of it for me that I love.
Well, the past couple of years was really challenging because we kept on, I think like a lot of other sports, anticipating and being prepared for when restrictions did allow us to host events. But we had several events canceled or postponed with COVID. So, we're just super thrilled that we were allowed, with the restrictions being eased, to come here and shoot again and have our first outdoor national championship in 2 years.
For months, Canadians have called for relief from skyrocketing cost of living. Today, they got more pain as inflation hits levels not seen in almost 40 years. At 8.1%, Canada's annual inflation rate is now the highest since January of 1983, when Trudeau Sr. was Prime Minister. But there are faint glimmers of relief in the distance, emphasis on distance. Nisha Patel explains.
At a Winnipeg grocery store, inflation is eating into budgets.
Buy less, to tell you the truth. Watch for sale.
I'm being a little more careful, more aware of how much I'm spending.
Spending less and just trying to save more in general, working more overtime.
For months, the costs of food and gasoline have ballooned.
There you go.
Now some pressures may be easing just slightly.
Food prices will continue to rise, don't get me wrong, but the pace to which prices are rising will slow down.
It's little consolation to many Canadians,
$47.95.
especially when paychecks are just not keeping up.
Honestly, you kind of have to laugh to keep from crying, right? Because it really is shocking to see foods that were once $2.99, $3.99 being shot up all the way to $7 to $9.99.
Urban gardener Ajwa Toku says sky-high prices are why she grows what she can. From tomatoes to eggplants, backyard produce cuts her summer grocery bills in half.
Living in the city, just that the cost of living is so high, it just really helps to be able to know that the money I do make doesn't have to go also into the food I'm eating.
Canadians are also paying more for travel as demand soars after 2 years of pandemic lockdowns. Airfares are 25% higher than a year ago. Hotels cost 50% more. Meanwhile, vehicle prices climbed 8% amid global supply chain problems. Still, some of those global pressures may be improving.
Global container shipping costs have been coming down, and so did commodity prices.
Here at home, Canada's housing market is cooling rapidly, but inflation isn't expected to return to the 2% target until the end of 2024.
It's a long way to fall from 8.1% to 2%. So there's a lot of work for the central bank.
So it's likely the Bank of Canada will continue to hike interest rates aggressively to rein in inflation, which remains painfully high.
The Indigenous-led effort to bring the 2030 Winter Olympics to Vancouver remains alive. Its fate was left in question earlier this week after city staff raised concerns about costs and timelines.
We asked the city to get in the canoe with us a few months back
And I was to say, it feels very upsetting when I have to answer some of the questions in the media by not having the opportunity for the leadership when they have concerns to come and talk to us face to face.
The Indigenous-led bid assembly, along with the Canadian Olympic Committee, appeared before City Council this morning, urging them to commit to the process. Vancouver City Manager had released a report critical of the plan, with issues around the funding model and a lack of agreement between crucial parties. The bid is estimated to cost of up to $4 billion, with $1.2 billion of it coming from taxpayers. Ultimately, Council voted today to move forward by gathering more information. Much to the relief of the bid assembly, the IOC is set to make its decision on a host city in May of 2023. For more insight into the bid and whether or not Vancouver can still win against the other frontrunner host city, Sapporo, Japan, I'm joined by Dave Dorogi. Dave is an international sports marketing executive who was involved in the Vancouver 2010 and London 2012 Olympic bids. Hi, Dave. So what do you make of the concerns raised by Vancouver City staff?
Hi, Lien. Yeah, I think they're perfectly reasonable and logical. I mean, they have an obligation to the taxpayers to be stewards of their money and to be very careful with any decision they make. Now, this event is so massive. There's nothing bigger in the world other than putting on a world war. It's so complex. It requires such a commitment. So these debates are healthy, natural. It's called democracy. I think it's great.
Okay, so what about the issue then of the shortened timeline? You know, the bid committee needs to submit to the International Olympic Committee in 6 months. In 2010, you had 6 years to work on that. What do you make of that timeline now?
I'm positive and pro-Olympics. I'm going to counter that with, we had 6 years to dot all the I's and T's. We did what I think is an amazing job, but we have so much experience on board now from 2010. We've done it before. So although the exercise is still complex, there are a lot of variables aren't there. Sea to Sky Highway's built, Trade and Convention Center is there, the bobsled run, the ski jump. So a lot of the planning that we did has been done. And so I think it's a little bit less of a leap of faith, actually, for the 2030 games than it was for the 2010 games. But this debate, I saw it happen in Vancouver. I saw it happen when I worked on the 2012 bid in London. I followed bids carefully, and it's natural. It's a short timeline. And I think that the bid committee are going to rise to the challenge.
What about the fact that, this bid committee has never worked together and, really the first time we're seeing it being Indigenous-led and the staff have outlined the challenges with having so many different parties not necessarily on board yet, in particular the province or the federal government?
It certainly makes it more of a challenge, more complex. I mean, it's all about building consensus. And once the bid committee can speak as one, they'll have a more powerful voice. And that's a great statement to make from 30,000 feet. But that is what has to happen, is that we don't have 3 levels of government and the different Indigenous voices, and we don't have different stakeholders all with their own ideas, but they come together. And I also am a real believer of a plebiscite. I'm a believer that we also have to let the citizens of Vancouver have their say.
Interesting. So one of the councillors did mention that today. They voted against it, but didn't say it was completely off the table. But I do want to know, before we let you go, what do you think needs to happen for Vancouver to pull ahead against Sapporo?
I think that, again, I'll come back to it. I think that if we had a plebiscite, and if we had a 60, 70, 80% mandate to go ahead with the citizens wanting to do it again, I think that would be a real endorsement to the IOC. And I don't believe that Sapporo have had that yet. And so I am a big proponent of having a vote in October. I think Councillor Hardwick is right on.
Right. It's interesting, though, because the COC, though, is worried if we did have a plebiscite that maybe people could vote no, and it's another risk factor, no?
It certainly is. And we had the vote in 2010. You'll remember we had a brand new mayor, Larry Campbell came in, and a couple of months before decision time, we had a vote right down to the wire. It was even closer than the timetable we're looking at now. And the people voted yes, but it really lit a fire under the bid committee to do a lot of the work that had to be done. So let's decide that we want to do it and go ahead and put our best foot forward.
Okay, all right. Thanks for the insight, Dave, for joining us today. Dave Dorogi is an international sports marketing executive who was involved in Vancouver and the London Olympic bids. A nation teetering on the brink of collapse, Sri Lanka's government is trying to steady a shaky situation. But the big question, will it work? We have the latest coming up.
From North Carolina had planned to tour the Mediterranean and sail through the Grecian islands this summer. Instead, they're here, watching the sailboats off Toronto Harbor.
Well, we were afraid of visiting Europe with the terrorist threats, the bombings that they've had at the various airports, and we decided to visit Canada as a quiet, peaceful alternative.
Fears of terrorism in Europe are also keeping some Canadians in Canada this summer. Archie Wright has cancelled a land tour of Europe.
There's no point in going to Europe and being scared.
Instead, he plans to tour Expo 86. Expo has been the big attraction this year for tourists, foreign and Canadian. The exhibition has just broken the 9 million visit mark, and Expo expects another 11 million will drop by before it closes in October. The low value of the Canadian dollar is providing a double-barreled bonus for our tourist industry. It's persuading a lot of Canadians to spend their money in Canada. And Americans know their money goes a lot further here, too.
Do we have some Americans? It's nice to have everyone over here. You just here for a short holiday?
Gasoline, though more expensive here than in the States, is still cheaper than it's been in years. And that's another incentive for visitors who like to tour the country by car. With all these incentives, Canada's had more than 3.5 million tourists during the first 5 months of this year. And that's the highest number ever recorded during a similar period. Tourism Canada says all provinces are reporting big increases in tourism. And visitor inquiries are up more than 50% in British Columbia, Alberta, Ontario, Quebec, and Newfoundland. That's the theme of Tourism Canada's $20 million American ad campaign, promoting Canada's old world charm, the city life, as well as the traditional wilderness scenes. Some Canadian cities are also spending a fortune to entice Americans up here.
When I come to Toronto, I come to play.
This is part of Toronto's $2.2 million television campaign, running in 5 U.S. cities. And it's working.
The primary reason is the aggressive marketing that's taking place by the industry as well as the government.
Tourism officials know they have to continue promoting Canada aggressively. They know that next year there may not be fears of terrorism, there may not be a dollar worth 72 cents American, and there won't be Expo. But those are next year's fears. For this year at least, the tourism industry, which had been sluggish, is enjoying one of its best years ever. Virtanen, CBC News, Toronto.
An Ontario family is taking a local hockey school to court, saying they want to restore their son's reputation and push for a culture change after he endured years of relentless bullying. Katie Nicholson with the toll they say it's taken and the moment it all came to a head.
It's still hard for Lucas de Calloway to talk about his experience at a private hockey school. So his parents are telling his story.
The bullying at the school started the first year.
Chasing NHL dreams, Lucas enrolled at Victus Academy in Kitchener, Ontario, a school for hockey prospects, some of whom his parents say were bullies.
They would dump his equipment, they would hide it, they would stick it in the shower and pour water on it.
They say there was physical bullying and constant taunts. Lucas became quieter and more withdrawn. His parents complained weekly to staff.
They would say, yeah, we'll deal with it. It would be quiet for a few days, and then all of a sudden it would ramp up again.
It came to a head in October of 2019 when police surrounded their car, their guns drawn. Lucas was arrested, accused of making death threats to other students.
The hardest thing for me is he said, "Help me, Daddy." And I get emotional when I hear that, but you know, I felt that I failed him as a father because I didn't know what was going on. I didn't, know what to do.
A police investigation would reveal students made false statements to police.
The allegations were false, there was no credibility to it, and the charges were completely withdrawn.
But the family says damage was done to the teen's reputation. The DeCalloways filed a $5.5 million lawsuit against the school and 3 students they call bullies. In a statement to CBC News, Victus Academy said it will be fully defending itself against this claim, as we are an academic and athletic school that reinforces respectful behavior every day in all that we do. The DeCalloways lawyer says he hopes this case brings more awareness to bullying in the sport.
When the evidence is heard in court, the wider Canadian public may get a very important glimpse into what happens in minor sport.
This lawsuit comes as a wider national conversation is happening about accountability and hockey's sometimes toxic culture.
It needs to change, and if we can do something to move the needle on that even a little bit, I think it would be good healing for all of us.
Especially for Lucas, who despite it all is still finding joy in the game. Katie Nicholson, CBC News, Toronto.
After weeks of fiery protests that drove its president to flee the country, Sri Lanka has a new leader tonight. But if his installation was meant to calm passions, it's already failed. Anita Bath has the latest on the crisis still gripping that country.
On the streets of Sri Lanka's capital, Colombo, another day of protests as Parliament chose its new president.
We won't back down. We won't let this be. We won't settle.
Many say former Prime Minister Ranil Wickremesinghe is just as responsible for the country's economic crisis as the man he replaces, ousted President Gotabaya Rajapaksa.
It's a sad day, though. It's a sad day, not just for the people of this country, but for whole of the world, I guess.
Sri Lanka is more than $50 billion US in debt, fueled by years of economic mismanagement, including steep tax cuts in 2019. Pandemic lockdowns choked tourism, and the government started printing money, leading inflation to skyrocket to more than 50%. Now everything is in short supply.
They've been trying to get fuel for 3-4 days and they couldn't get it. And my dad gave up. There were some videos that my dad recorded and sent to me that there's like kilometers of line just to get into one gas station.
Nethmal Pereira moved to Vancouver in 2017, leaving his parents and 2 sisters behind.
I would say the hardest thing for me is worrying about my family, because there's nothing that you can do. Because at one point it's even pointless to send even money, because yes, you can send money, but there's nothing to be bought for.
He says the country needs a new and stable government to tackle the financial crisis and quell protests, and this is not it.
Protesters does not want to see anything of the old regime. They want a new political culture. So actually what they're requesting is elections.
But the new president is set to serve the remainder of the old one's term until 2024. So for now, this is likely to continue. Anita Bath, CBC News, Vancouver.
The wife of the Ukrainian president spoke before U.S. Congress today. Olena Zelenska talked about the children who have died in Russia's war on Ukraine and made a plea for more help.
I'm asking for air defense systems in order for rockets not to be killed, not to kill children in their strollers, in order for rockets not to destroy children's rooms and kill entire families.
Today in eastern Ukraine, a 13-year-old boy was killed by a Russian missile as he was waiting for a bus. His sister was injured. 2 other people were also killed. Kharkiv has experienced almost daily shelling over the past month after a period of relative calm. Beleaguered UK Prime Minister Boris Johnson quoted a line from a Terminator film today while addressing Parliament. It was part of a goodbye speech as his Conservative Party narrowed the search to replace him. Margaret Evans reports.
The House divided.
Opposition MPs refusing to stand for Boris Johnson as he left what's expected to be his last Prime Minister's question time with characteristic bravado.
Hasta la vista, baby. Thank you.
No surprise there.
Any regrets, Prime Minister?
But it's the division Johnson created in his own house that's seen him so unceremoniously ushered out the door. Something the opposition Labour leader Keir Starmer felt compelled to remind him, talking about the race to replace him.
What message does it send when the candidates to be Prime Minister can't find a single decent thing to say about him, about each other, or their record in government?
It was only 2 weeks ago that Johnson's former Health Minister Sajid Javid delivered a blistering indictment of Johnson's leadership to Parliament.
I have concluded that the problem starts at the top. That is not going to change.
His resignation set off an avalanche of others also questioning the Prime Minister's integrity, including one from his former Chancellor, Rishi Sunak. He's now one of the last two candidates standing to take Johnson's place. The other, Foreign Minister Liz Truss, is considered a Johnson loyalist, even though in the end she said it was right for him to resign.
Under Conservative Party rules, the broader membership will vote for which of the two they want to take up residence here at Downing Street. That, by the way, is how Boris Johnson first came to power. His predecessor, Theresa May, also forced to quit by her own colleagues.
May was one of the last Conservative MPs to stand for Johnson, and there was no clapping from her. Johnson has shown little public contrition, clocking a few more photo ops and daring headliners not to call him Top Gun. Today he offered another bullish performance, listing his own accomplishments.
I helped to get the biggest Tory majority for 40 years and a huge realignment in UK politics.
Making his fall from grace all the more spectacular. Virtanen, CBC News, London.
While temperatures have dipped slightly in the UK following a crushing heat wave, on the European mainland, the conditions are still sweltering, the latest on a continent plunged into a heat crisis. Next. And there's a live shot looking out towards the North Shore on a gorgeous evening here. Warm, but not too hot, fortunately. Johanna will be back with your forecast after the break.
In the 1960s, the sexual revolution was really important. Hi, I'm Tina Fettner, professor of sociology at McMaster University. Today we're going to talk about how activism shapes sexual discourse in Canada. When Canada was founded, the expectation surrounding sex and romance was that everybody would get married, and basically men owned women that they were married to. The World Wars had a great impact on the way sexual identity was shaped because it moved people around and it relocated young adults into cities, giving them the opportunities to establish gay neighborhoods. First of all, in Canada, it loosened up a lot of laws banning same-sex sexual interaction and created new spaces for premarital sexuality, is what they would have called it at the time, creating the chance to have sex for pleasure, not just to have babies. First, big cities, Montreal, Toronto, and Vancouver all had gay neighborhoods that were really important to the development of community. But also, you see university towns like Winnipeg and Saskatoon develop important activist hubs that really created a movement that changed things in Canada. Men's rights activism in the 1980s was a backlash against feminism and LGBT sexuality, and so a bit of retrenchment there. Key to LGBT activism in Canada were the student groups of university students that were demanding rights, and also big organizations like EGAL in big cities like Toronto. probably 2005 when same-sex marriage was legally recognized. The real difference between the sexual revolution in the United States and in Canada is that in Canada you also had a bunch of liberalization of policies that went with it, whereas in the United States you just had the attitudes, but the policies stayed really locked down. Yeah, I think it's very unlikely that straight identity is going to fade away. It's not a zero-sum game. LGBT activism is not a threat to straight people.
In the year 2050, how will BC look? From agriculture to cities, how will climate change life? Don't miss 2050, Degrees of Change, a CBC Vancouver original podcast, now available.
Across the Atlantic, record-breaking heat has swept across Europe, leaving people struggling to cope. CBC's Abby Wagstaffe has the latest.
Temperatures have dropped significantly in most parts of the United Kingdom, bringing much-needed relief after 2 days of sweltering heat. The Met Office chief scientist blames man-made climate change, and the Mayor of London, Sadiq Khan, echoing these sentiments as he outlined the strain placed on emergency services.
Yesterday was the busiest day for the fire service in London since the Second World War. On a normal day, they may receive about 350 calls. On a busy day, around 500 calls. Yesterday, we received more than 2,600 calls.
In East London, several people lost their homes. The mayor confirming a dozen fires were raging at the same time. The London Fire Brigade says most of the larger fires from Tuesday are now under control, but crews continue their work. European neighbors struggling too.
It's just really hot. It's exhausting. Really hard to go anywhere. In the metros there's probably 50, so if you go in there you're just full of sweat. It's just really hot, and it's actually too hot for Europe, I guess.
In Portugal, the health authority says more than 1,000 deaths are linked to the stifling temperatures. Wildfires raging in Spain as soldiers help battle blazes nationwide, with temperatures set to remain in the high 30s this week. And in Greece, nearly 500 firefighters working to put out a massive blaze in the suburbs near Athens. Hundreds of people have been forced to leave their homes there. And the World Meteorological Organization says the climate emergency is here.
In the future, these kind of heat waves are going to be normal, and we will see even stronger extremes. We have already pumped so much carbon dioxide to the atmosphere that the negative trend will continue for the coming decades.
He says even if successful mitigation steps are taken right now, this climate trend will continue until at least 2060. But stressed, governments need to do everything possible to avert further disaster. Abby Wagstaffe, CBC News, London.
Wow, Joe joins us again. You know, that report there really highlighting how urgent that climate crisis is. So, Joe, it's 3 in the morning right now over in Europe and in most places. What are temperatures looking like? Any relief?
Yeah, I like her tradition, Leanne, of us checking in on those European early morning temperatures, because this really is a big part of the heat story. Take a look at what would be the overnight lows right now across much of Europe and the UK. 27 in northern Italy, 17 in London, 19 in Paris. But keep in mind, Environment Canada usually issues the heat warning for Vancouver when our overnight lows are that high. And these are the current lows happening right now across Europe. So even though the most intense heat has shifted east and north. We saw that today in places like Belgium, West Germany, the Netherlands. That's where we saw the 40-degree temperatures. It is still above seasonal across a huge swath of Europe. It's really something that we'll be keeping in mind, that it's not just the daytime highs, it's those overnight lows where we don't get much of the relief. And we'll be looking at those 17, 18, 19 overnight lows next week. I'll take you there in a quick moment. Let's start off with our current temperatures. 23 for YVR, a 27 up towards Squamish, and a 29 out towards Abbotsford. Bit of a humidex this afternoon across the west. Speaking of humidex, look at the current values for Ontario, Quebec, and the Maritimes. Second day of heat warnings for a huge swath of eastern Canada. They've just been extended into the Maritimes, so still feeling late in this evening like 36 in through Toronto, but a cold front is bringing thunderstorms and potential tornadoes into that hot air. Okay, getting us to our own forecast. A few more clouds tomorrow. There you can see them sneaking up from the south. A little system tries to get in. I think the best it'll do is some lovely cirrus that'll make for a more interesting sky. And that's showing up in the forecast for Victoria, Kelowna. Again, just a few more clouds than what we saw today, but temperatures will be very similar across British Columbia. Getting some sunshine in through Prince Rupert, and you do deserve it. It has been very showery for you. Okay, watching that heat up in our forecast. Again, comfortable over the next couple of days for most people. It's Sunday that we'll start to see those temperatures creep up into concerning values. Once we see those 30-degree temperatures inland, we'll likely get a heat warning issued. I was looking at some of the long-range forecasts, Leanne, and maybe cool down coming next Friday, but I'll keep you posted.
Okay, we will keep watching for that. Thank you for that, Joe.
You're welcome.
Reclaiming and reimagining where a garden can grow. After the break, we meet the self-described guerrilla gardeners, staking a claim and growing food in unlikely places.
We empowered the automotive community, the race car drivers, the motorcycle racers, to come out and help our cause, which this year would be to get a buddy dog for our friend here, Nathan. It's an incredible feeling when the automotive community comes out and supports your cause.
What a great showing with all the great cars around. There's a couple of hundred cars here for sure, if not more. And we're raising money for CNIB's Guide Dog program. This is the third year that Wheels for Wishes has been helping out the program. Each of our guide dogs costs around $50,000 from the time that they're raised and matched with the handler and to the time that they retire. So Wheels for Wishes has come forward to raise more than that in each year that they've worked with us, and certainly we're looking to exceed that again this year. Guide dogs are, an extension of the person themselves and can help navigate the world safely, to avoid obstacles, avoid dangerous situations.
It starts to give a young child some independence. It gets them ready for later in life in the event that they need a full-fledged guide dog. So when we deliver the dog, or the dog gets delivered to the child, it's really the beginning of their training stages. The independence of the dog, how they have to take care of the dog, take the dog for a walk. It's a really good thing. It's basically a learning step for when they get later in life. Last year we had a show. The turnout was really good, not quite as good as this year. And the year before we did a cruise called Cruising 'Cause We Care. Each year we've managed to make the $50,000 to get the dog for children with vision loss. Today will be pretty crazy. It'll be good, but we will continue to grow bigger and better, because as we gain awareness for children with sight loss, we'll make bigger shows, we'll get more people, and our end goal is to have people come from away to come to our show. So, we win on all levels, and we start to get some international exposure. We think it's really important that everybody comes out, supports the CNIB Guide Dog program. It's pretty important to us. It's near and dear to our hearts. If you get the opportunity to see one of these child with their dog with the vest on, it's pretty amazing. It's a great thing. So it's really cool when all of our friends come out here today. We look around, we see beautiful cars, new cars, old cars, race cars. It's just amazing. It's a great thing. We have a special surprise for Nathan. There may just be a superhero arrive later on today, and you never know. There may be someone just hanging around on a rooftop here.
Hi, I'm Amy Bell. Here's what's in your CBC Vancouver inbox.
Don't miss the Vancouver Queer Film Festival, August 11th to 21st. Enjoy the best in local and international queer cinema, along with workshops, filmmaker panels, and more. Get tickets today at queerfilmfestival.ca. And on July 31st, join your favorite CBC Vancouver and CBC British Columbia personalities at the Vancouver Pride Parade. Learn more at vancouverpride.ca.
So where does your food come from? It's a question you might ask when you pick out produce at the grocery store. And it's been a mission of some urban gardeners and farmers to grow food as close to home as possible, perhaps much closer than you might imagine. Our Melody Jacobson takes a closer look at 3 examples of people using public and private land to feed their community.
This well-tended patch of land not far from the city's core is one of Vancouver's oldest and one of Canada's largest community gardens.
I fell in love with the place as soon as I walked in. I'd never seen a community garden that looked quite like this one does.
These 3 acres were formed over 30 years ago. Before it ever saw the hint of a flower bed or tomato seed, it was a landfill. Frustrated with the lack of green space in much of East Vancouver, in 1991 people started clearing the land and creating plots. Oliver Kalhammer was the first.
There were also areas like the area that eventually became Cottonwood Gardens, which had been used as dump sites. So this is a place where contractors and just people would just abandon their cars or dump like a load of sheetrock. So the city was actually run very differently depending on what neighborhood you were living in. So people in my neighborhood, in the Grandview Woodlands and the downtown east side, were really frustrated with the sort of what we called recreational apartheid.
What began slowly grew quickly. They called themselves guerrilla gardeners. The city got on board. Kalhammer says people from all corners of the earth connected in the garden.
Everyone had their own food that they grew. So people were trading, artichokes for bok choy, or trading seeds and trading recipes.
Getting space in a community garden in Metro Vancouver these days is not easy. Most have a wait list. But there are other ways to enjoy food grown close to home, sometimes very close.
Are you picking up a share?
Yeah, for Neil Power.
Perfect, thank you.
You're welcome.
Did he tell you how it works?
Yes, I think I pick one thing from each section. Is that right?
Yeah, so everything you get is written on that chalkboard.
Oh, right.
And then you can just follow it along right to left. And if you have any questions, let us know.
Okay, thank you so much. Looks beautiful.
Like the guerrilla gardeners from 30 years ago, City Beet Farms is reimagining where food can grow and how people can get their hands on it. Except they made it their business.
We use people's front yards mostly. Some of them are backyards. The arrangement is that we do all the farming in the yard.
Fruit and vegetables instead of grass, fresh off the vine and sold in the community. So after they harvest, the fruits, flowers, and the vegetables, like these beets, are available for weekly pickup by their customers. It's all about building community.
We saw, in COVID and in the floods, for food security, it really helps to be able to get the food from nearby so the supply chains are as simple as possible and things aren't getting interrupted. If we had a food system that had a lot more really small, like micro and small scale farms, that kind of food system would be a lot more secure.
Morning glory is one of the biggest invasive species that we deal with.
But if you don't have a yard to call your own, there's another way to get dirt under your fingernails. Marie-Pierre Bilodeau started Refarmers to promote environmental protection and biodiversity. Amongst many projects, they garden in traffic circles with the endorsement of the City of Vancouver.
Just let them know where you'd like to guerrilla garden, and they actually encourage you to rewild or plant pollinators in city spaces.
She clears invasive plants like morning glory to make way for pollinators like fireweed and California poppies.
Pollinators are extremely necessary for any gardener or food plants, so like bees and even butterflies. Wildflowers would just make it such a habitat for pollinators.
Reimagining and reclaiming what can be a garden for people and the food they grow. The guerrilla gardeners at Cottonwood would be proud. Melody Jacobson, CBC News, Vancouver.
Big thank you to those guerrilla gardeners. I always love driving up to a roundabout and then you see these beautiful flowers and bees and sometimes even plants growing there. It's very cool. So thanks for that. And if you're interested to where the Cottonwood Community Garden is, it's actually in the Strathcona neighborhood. So 3 acres of land, pretty cool to see. And big fan of City Beat Farms. I've actually had the privilege of buying some groceries from them because they're just around the corner from my house where they do that drop. Very cool. All right. And great job to Melody Jacobson for her first television story. Okay, that does it for us tonight on CBC News at 6. And to remind you, of course, download CBC Gem. You can watch us there every day. It's our free app, and Dan Burt will be here at 11 p.m. after the National with our late news program. Have a good night.